The doctor positions a girl's body for cremation, but sees a tear running down her cheek and shouts, "Stop everything!" The room was cold. Those white hospital lights didn't give off any heat. They just made everything look paler. The cremation oven was already on, making a low, constant sound, as if an animal were breathing inside the wall. The clock read 9:40. The air felt heavy. The girl's body lay there motionless, covered up to her chest with a white sheet. She was too small for that metal stretcher. The name Nayara Lopez was written on a yellowed piece of paper stuck to the corner of the sheet. Technician Javier, his face sweaty, arranged the papers on the table, trying to act as if it were just another normal day, just another body among so many. "Doctor, everything is ready to begin," he asked without lifting his gaze. "Wait a minute," replied Mark, the doctor, in a low, distracted voice. He approached slowly. The sheet had a small fold at the girl's shoulders. Mark smoothed it out, a simple, automatic gesture, but his heart began to tighten. Her skin did not have that gray tone he knew so well. There was a strange, almost alive glow reflecting the cold light from the ceiling. He frowned and leaned over a little closer. Javier looked at him anxiously. "Doctor, the oven is already hot. I need your signature." Mark didn't answer. He remained there, staring at the girl's face. The air seemed trapped inside the room. Mark muttered, "Lend me the flashlight." "What for?" "Just give it to me." The confused technician obeyed. Mark turned on the flashlight and pointed the light at the girl's face, and then he saw it. A small wet glint in the corner of her left eye that for a second he thought was a reflection, but the reflection moved and grew. The doctor blinked in disbelief. The drop fell slowly, stubbornly, rolling down her pale cheek to her chin. "Oh my God," he whispered, almost without a voice. "That's a tear." Javier turned pale. "What? A tear?" Mark repeated, now firmly. "You're seeing it, right?" The technician approached with his eyes wide open. The whole room seemed to stop breathing. The oven was still on, but its sound now seemed distant, as if the world had turned down the volume. The tear fell slowly and stained the white sheet. Mark took half a step back, his heart pounding. Reason told him it was impossible, but instinct said otherwise. He touched the girl's pulse with a trembling hand, just to confirm what he already felt in his chest, and he felt a faint pulse, almost nothing but alive. His eyes filled with tears. "Stop it now!" he shouted. "Turn off the oven now!" Javier stumbled over his own feet in fear. "And now what?" Javier repeated. Mark leaned over the girl. "She's alive." The technician ran to the panel, quickly turning everything off. The sound of the machine stopped, and silence filled the room. Mark put his ear to the girl's chest. Her heart was beating slowly, but it was beating. He looked up, his eyes filled with tears, and whispered, "Hang in there, little one. There's still time." But days before, the sound of the wind coming in through the window was the only thing alive that afternoon. The thin curtains moved slowly, and the tired sun drew golden stripes on the floor. Nayara was there in the same corner as always, sitting on an old wooden stool, her hair falling over her shoulders, straight and a little tangled. She had the face of a girl who had grown up too fast but without strength. The window overlooked a dirt road with red dust and the smell of old rain. The neighborhood children ran outside, laughing, kicking a ball made of old socks. Nayara watched and smiled, but did not move. Her body seemed very heavy, as if every breath was an effort. On the wall was a shelf with toys she no longer used: a bear without an eye, a doll without an arm. But on the table, there was something she always touched: a pile of old magazines, newspaper clippings, pencil drawings, all with the same theme: the sea, waves, fish, whales, boats. She collected images of the sea like someone collects dreams. "Nayara," her mother's soft voice came from the kitchen, a little tired. "Aren't you going to eat anything, daughter?" She didn't answer. She moved the papers with her fingertips, distracted. Her mother appeared in the doorway with her apron stained with sauce. Romina was a simple woman, with a sweet gaze, but a face full of worry. "Those drawings again?" she asked with a slight smile. "You should be playing with the girls outside." Nayara looked up, somewhat lost. "I don't want to, Mom. I'm fine here." Romina approached and put her hand on her shoulder. You're pale again, daughter. It seems like you didn't sleep well. I slept, she said softly, almost in a whisper. I'm just tired. Then came that silence that only a mother and daughter understand. Romina took a deep breath and tucked the girl's hair behind her ear. You know, I dreamed we were on a boat. The sea was so blue, my life so beautiful. Nayara's eyes sparkled, and for a moment her face lit up blue like in the movie The Blue Whale. Just like that, said her mother, laughing. And you laughed so much. Nayara smiled, but it was a short smile, as if she were afraid of getting attached to the moment. After her mother left, the girl looked out the window again. Outside, a group of children were shouting, "Goal!" and a dog was barking. Nayara lifted her face a little and felt the wind. The wind smelled of wet earth and leaves, and in the background, she could swear she smelled the sea salt, even though she had never seen the real sea. She grabbed a blue notebook and opened it to a page with drawings of shells. She took a short pencil with bitten ends and began to draw. She drew a small boat floating on the waves. In the middle, she drew a girl with her hair flying. One day, I'm going to see the sea, she wrote in small letters in the corner of the page. Her mother passed by the hallway again and heard a cough. Nayara, you're coughing again. It's nothing, Nayara replied quickly, hiding the notebook in her lap. You always say it's nothing. You worry me, daughter. Nayara looked at her sweetly. Don't worry, I just get tired, but it passes. Romina sighed, not very convinced. I'm going to tell your dad to take you to the doctor tomorrow. The girl nodded, but her eyes returned to the window. Outside, the sky was beginning to change color. The orange was turning pink, and the pink was mixing with a blue just like the one her dad always drew. Her dad came home from work shortly after, sweaty, smelling like the workshop, and with a tired smile. Look at my painter, he said, looking at the drawings. You're going to be an artist, huh? She laughed softly. It's not painting, Dad. It's the sea. The sea. He sat down next to her, curious. But you've never seen the sea. I know, Nayara said firmly but calmly. But I feel it here. And she put her hand on her chest. Balthazar looked at her, not knowing what to say, then put his arm around her and hugged her gently. One day, I'll take you to see it. Yes, I promise. She looked at him with wide, shining eyes. You really promise? I promise, he said with that crooked smile of someone who wants to believe that everything will turn out all right. And she believed him, because when you're a child, your parents' promises still smell like truth. Night fell slowly. The streetlight shone through the window, mixed with the sound of crickets and an old radio playing a sad song. Nayara rested her forehead on the cold glass and stared into nothingness outside. The moon reflected in the puddles from the afternoon rain, and in that silvery glow, she imagined the sea, the sound of the waves, the wind on her face, the water between her toes. She smiled to herself, tired, but with a full heart. She was a quiet girl, yes, but inside there was noise, the noise of the sea she dreamed of knowing. Don Balthazar stared at his daughter. My girl, he began in a low, hesitant voice. You hardly play in the street anymore. What's wrong, Nayara? She slowly looked up, her big brown eyes shining with a sad, dull light. She forced a slight smile without showing her teeth. Nothing, Dad. I'm just tired, he sighed. Tired of what, daughter? You don't do anything heavy. She shrugged. I don't know, I'm just very sleepy. Balthazar looked at Romina, who was washing the dishes in the kitchen. The two exchanged a quick glance, one of those that say everything without speaking. He ran his hand through his hair and approached his daughter. You're very pale, my love, and your hands are cold, he asked, taking her little hands in his and trying to warm them. You're like ice. Nayara laughed softly but sadly. I've always been like this, Dad. He shook his head impatiently. That's not true. You used to run around the house and paint your mom's face with markers. Now it seems like even breathing tires you out. The girl looked away, focusing on the drawing in front of her. She was drawing a seahorse, but her hand was shaking, and the pencil strayed a little from the line. Don't worry about me, Dad, she said in a low voice. I just want to rest a little. He was silent for a few seconds, staring at the floor. Sometimes, I don't understand you, Nayara. His voice sounded broken. When I was a child, if I stayed quiet like that, My dad would say I was throwing a tantrum. But you don't seem angry. You seem distant. She lifted her face, and for a moment her expression seemed too serious for a 13-year-old girl. I think a lot, Dad. What do you think about? Everything, she replied simply, without wanting to explain. Balthazar tried to smile. Oh, my girl. Children should think about playing, not everything. Nyara laughed a little, like a little puff. I don't know how to play well, Dad. Those words lingered in the air. A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the dripping of the tap in the kitchen. Romina turned off the water and dried her hands on her apron. Balthazar, leave the girl alone for a while, she said, trying to calm him down. She's weak. Weak? Why? He replied, annoyed. She eats well, sleeps well. She has no problems. He turned to look at her again, his voice softer. Explain to me, Nyara, why it seems like the world hurts you. She shrugged, her shoulders, her eyes filled with tears, but without crying. Sometimes I feel like my heart is beating slowly, Dad, as if it were going to stop, but then it goes away. Balthazar's body froze. What do you mean, as if it were going to stop? You should have told me. I don't want to worry you, he whispered, barely audibly. He took a deep breath, trying not to lose control. He knelt in front of her and gently cupped her face as if a wounded bird. Look at me, daughter. You are all I have. If something is wrong, we will fix it. I swear. She nodded slowly, trying to smile. I know, Dad. Romina arrived with a glass of water and a pill. Take it, daughter. The doctor said it is for the headache. Nyara took the glass with both hands, but she took a long time to drink it. Her father watched her every movement, as if looking for something hidden in her eyes. The more he looked at her, the more afraid he felt. After taking the medicine, she lay down on the couch. Balthazar grabbed a thin blanket and covered her up to her neck. He sat there next to her without saying anything, his hand slowly stroking his daughter's hair in an automatic gesture full of love and sadness. The radio continued to play softly, a sad, old song. Balthazar leaned back in the back of the armchair and looked at the ceiling with eyes full of tears. He whispered to himself, if I could take away this pain, my daughter, I would. And he stayed there, listening to the sound of the wind coming in through the window, the soft breathing of the girl, a father's heart tightening without knowing why. Nyara's room was small, but it had soul. The walls that were once white were now covered with clippings from old magazines, brochures, pieces of yellowed newspaper, giant waves, boats, dolphins jumping, that blue she had never really seen before. It was a whole sea, trapped in a small room of a few square meters. In the corner was a shoebox full of shells that her father brought her from his short work trips, shells bought at roadside markets, but which she cared for, like treasures. She touched each one carefully, as if the sound of the sea were still stored inside every night before going to sleep. Nyara would grab the same old magazine, a cover with a gray whale jumping on the surface, run her fingers over the image, and smile to herself. Do you think it hurts to breathe down there? She asked one day, looking at her mother who was folding clothes on the bed. Romina laughed without really understanding. What do you mean, sweetie, at the bottom of the sea? Nyara replied thoughtfully. Whales breathe outside, don't they? But they live down there. It must be strange, mustn't it? Her mother sat down next to her and stroked her hair. And why are you so interested in the sea, eh? The girl shrugged. I don't know. I think it's beautiful. It's big. It seems free. Romina looked around at the blue room and sighed. You should want to get to know people, not fish, my daughter. Nyara laughed softly. Fish don't fight, Mom. Romina let out a short laugh, but then the curl turned into a sigh. She realized how much her daughter lived in her own world, a world where no one shouted, no one got sick, no one was in a hurry, just the calm and infinite sea. One hot afternoon, Balthazar came home with a gift, a little pink portable radio. Look what I found in the workshop, he said excitedly. It still works. Nyara picked it up carefully, as if it were a fragile little animal, turned the knob, and listened to noises, voices, songs, until she found a station that was showing a documentary about the ocean. The narrator spoke slowly, describing the sound of the waves, the size of the sharks, the cold of the depth. She sat still, listening to every word as if it were poetry. When the program ended, she took a deep breath and looked at her dad. "Dad, what do you think the sea smells like?" He thought for a moment. Salt, wind, and freedom. She closed her eyes and smiled. Freedom must smell nice. In the days that followed, Nayara began to watch every documentary she could find on the small TV in the living room. She was enchanted by the sounds of the dolphins and the softness of the water. She spent hours copying drawings of fish, turtles, and coral. Sometimes she was so absorbed that she didn't even notice the time. Romina watched her from afar, with a mixture of tenderness and fear. "Nayara, don't you get tired of always watching the same thing?" She didn't answer, not taking her eyes off the screen. "It's just that every time I watch it, I see something different." Her father, wanting to join in the conversation, joked, "What if I take you to see it for real? I bet you'll run away from the sea at the first wave." She shook her head with a stubborn smile. "I just want to see it up close. I don't need to get in the water." "You're scared," he teased her, laughing. Nayara paused a little before answering. "I think so, but it's a nice kind of fear." Balthazar didn't understand how fear could be nice, girl. She looked at him sweetly, with a calmness that seemed adult. "I just don't want to break the dream if I go and it's different. Maybe the sea will look smaller." Romina, standing at the door, heard those words and felt a chill. Sometimes Nayara spoke in a way that made the world seem deeper. One night, the power went out in Texas. The house was dark, with only the moon shining through the window. Nayara lit a candle and sat on the floor next to the bed. She picked up one of her shells and put it to her ear. "Listen, Mom," she said, smiling. "You can hear the sea." Romina crouched down too and put it to her ear. "I don't hear anything, honey. Listen carefully. Close your eyes." And for a moment, her mother did hear a continuous soft noise that could have been the wind or the sea trying to speak. "It's the sound that gets trapped in the shells," said Nayara, delighted. "It never goes away." Romina swallowed her tears. "You talk as if you really know the sea." "I do know it," she replied firmly. "Only I haven't seen it yet." That night, Nayara slept hugging the box of shells. In her dream, she was in a small boat, rocking gently with the wind on her face and the sound of whale far away. Outside, her father and mother were in the kitchen, watching the room through a crack in the door. Romina murmured, "She talks so much about the sea that it seems her heart lives there." Balthazar felt his eyes fill with tears. "And if that's where she wants to live, let it be her sea, Romina, her way of breathing." The candle slowly went out, and the room was left in darkness, with only the glow of the stars on the ceiling and the distant sound of a girl dreaming of the sea. The night was heavy, the heat had gone, and the wind coming in through the window brought a damp cold that clung to the skin. Romina closed the curtains slowly, trying not to make any noise. She looked at the bed and saw Nayara curled up under the sheet, her face red and her hair stuck to her forehead. "Why are you sweating so much, sweetie?" she said softly. "You have a fever again." Nayara opened her eyes with effort. They were tired, but lively. She tried to smile. "I'm fine, Mom. It's just the heat." Romina sat on the edge of the bed and put her hand on her daughter's forehead. It was burning. Her heart sank. She took the wet cloth from the bucket next to her and slowly wiped the girl's forehead, just as she had done when she was a baby. "You're burning up, my love. Tomorrow I'll take you to the hospital." Her voice trembled. "This is getting out of hand." Nayara closed her eyes. "It's not necessary, Mom. They always say it's nothing. I don't care what they say," she replied firmly. "I'm your mother, and I can feel when something is wrong." Silence. Only the sound of the cloth being wrung out in the bucket. Outside, a dog barked, and the wind slammed the gate. The house seemed to breathe along with them, slowly, tensely. Nayara turned her face toward the wall covered with clippings of the sea. The waves seemed to move with the soft light of the spotlight. Her voice came out softly, almost like a sigh, lost in the air. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course, my love." Romina leaned over, adjusting the sheet. "What is it?" "I'd like to see the sea someday." She paused briefly, searching for air. "But if I don't wake up..." Romina interrupted her, frightened. Hey, what is it?" Nayara smiled a little, as if to calm her mother. "It's just a yes, Mom. If I don't wake up, you can throw my ashes into the sea. I saw it in a movie. Romina felt her chest tighten and the air catch in her throat. She tried to laugh nervously. Don't be silly, daughter. What sea? What ashes? You're going to wake up. Of course you're going to get better. But Nayara insisted in a calm, almost sweet voice. I'm serious, Mom. I want the sea to see me, even if it's like this. Romina's eyes filled with tears. She turned away for a moment to hide them, pretending to reach for the glass of water. Here, drink a little. Come on. Her voice trembled. The girl took a small sip and smiled. It's cold, just like the sea must be. Romina took her hand tightly, and silence returned. The clock on the wall read a little past 11. Time seemed to drag on heavily. Promise me you'll stop talking like that, Romina asked. Her tears stuck in her throat. You're going to see the sea. Alive. Did you hear me? Alive. Nayara squeezed her mother's hand back with a weak gesture. I promise. But if I can't go, you take what's left of me, yes. Just so he can know me too. Romina couldn't hold back the tears. They came out. Stop it, daughter, please now. Nayara fell silent and stared at the ceiling with a lost look in her eyes. The light flickered once and came back on. She took a slow, deep breath, her chest rising with effort. Mom, does the sea make noise when it sleeps? She asked softly. Romina held back her tears and smiled through them. It must, just like you grumble and dream. The girl gave a weak smile. Then maybe I'll hear it today. Romina stroked her hair, removing the strands stuck to her forehead. Sleep, my love. Tomorrow will be a better day. Nayara slowly closed her eyes. The room fell silent, except for the soft sound of her breathing. Romina sat there, staring at the lit candle, the wind banging on the window, the wet rag in the bucket, now cold. She thought about getting up, but couldn't. She stayed there, holding her daughter's hand, afraid to let go as she ran her hand over her face and repeated in a low voice, almost like a prayer, You will see the sea, my love. Yes, you will see it. And so she stayed for hours without sleeping, her heart tight and a nameless fear inside her. Outside, the wind blew strongly, sounding like the distant waves that Nayara dreamed so much of hearing. The sun had not yet fully risen, and the house was enveloped in that silence that comes before the day, when the air is heavy and time seems to be in no hurry. Romina woke up with a strange feeling, one of those that make no noise but hurt inside. She sat up in bed and stayed there for a few seconds, trying to understand the reason for the knot in her chest. Romina murmured, looking at her husband, who was still sleeping, exhausted. She got up slowly, her cold feet touching the icy floor. She ran her hands over her face and went to her daughter's room, pushing the door open carefully so as not to wake her. The morning light streamed in through the cracks in the thin blue curtains. The room smelled of medicine and clean clothes. Nayara was lying in the same position as always, the sheet pulled up to her neck, her hair scattered across the pillow. Romina smiled a little, relieved, and approached her. My dear, wake up. It's time for your medicine. Her voice was sweet, but tired. There was no response. Taking another step, thinking the girl was still asleep, she sat on the edge of the bed and put her hand on her arm. The skin was cold, very cold. Romina frowned in surprise and touched the girl's icy face. She put her ear to her mouth. Nothing. No sound. No breath. Romina said more softly, Wake up, sweetie. Silence. The mother put 2 fingers on the girl's neck, searching for a pulse. She searched again, harder, trembling. No, 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 she whispered, her voice breaking. Her heart raced. She felt her body go limp, as if the ground had disappeared beneath her. She moved the girl carefully. Nayara's voice rose, filled with desperation. Nayara, please wake up. Balthazar appeared at the door, still half asleep, rubbing his eyes. What's wrong, love? Romina turned to him, pale. She's not breathing. He ran to the bed, his face changing completely. No, this is a joke. He touched his daughter's face and felt the ice. My God, Nayara. He began to shake her desperately. Daughter, come on, wake up. Look at me, look at me. Romina cried, trying to call emergency services, but her hands were shaking so much that she dropped her cell phone. She was fine yesterday. Balthazar only had a fever. This can't be happening, he repeated, beside himself. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Romina screamed her daughter's name, the phone falling to the floor. The father tried to press on her little chest, not knowing what to do. The sound of his breathing mixed with the mother's cries. The clock read 7:20 when the siren was heard in the street. 2 paramedics rushed in with bags, equipment, gloves. Romina was leaning against the wall, her legs weak. "She's not breathing!" Balthazar shouted desperately. "Please do something!" The paramedics approached. One put his stethoscope on the girl's chest, then checked her pulse, her eyes, her temperature. They looked at each other with quick, cold, professional glances. "How long has she been like this?" asked the older one. Romina stammered. I don't know. I just came in. She was asleep." The man took a deep breath and shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Lopez." He grabbed her arm. "What do you mean, I'm sorry? Try again. She's just a child," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "Please try again." The paramedic looked at his colleague and lowered his voice. "There are no vital signs. Dilated pupils, rigidity. It's recent, but it's already." He hesitated, looking at the mother. "It's too late." Romina fell to her knees. A sound came out of her, a scream that didn't seem human, torn, full of pain. Balthazar took a step back, his hands on his head, his eyes lost. No, she was fine. She was fine yesterday," he repeated over and over again, as if saying it could change what he saw. The room felt smaller, suffocating. The sound of gloves, the closing of the medical bag, the mother's crying filling the walls. One of the paramedics wrote something on a piece of paper in a neutral voice. "Probable cardiac failure. Natural causes." Romina raised her tear-filled face. "Natural," she shouted. "Natural is for children to play, run, laugh. This is not natural." Balthazar leaned on the bed and took his daughter's cold hand. He stared at those thin fingers, now colorless. His body was shaking all over. "My girl," he whispered, resting his forehead on hers. If I had known it was the last night, I would have stayed by your side the whole time." Romina approached slowly and hugged them both, and so they remained father, mother, and daughter. In a heavy silence that cut through the air outside, the day was really beginning to dawn. The sun beat down on the walls of the house, entering through the cracks in the illuminating the room. But inside everything was cold. Everything was gray. Romina ran her fingers through her daughter's hair and whispered with a broken voice, "You wanted to see the sea, my love." And she cried and cried until she had no strength left. She cried until her body no longer responded. Meanwhile, Balthazar stared at the ceiling, unable to understand how the world could keep turning when his daughter's heart had stopped. The silence in the house was heavy. Nothing could be heard, not even the birds that always came to the wall in the morning. The clock in the kitchen marked time, like torture, tick-tock, tick-tock, reminding them that the world went on even though theirs had stopped. Romina sat at the table with a cup of cold coffee in her hands, her gaze lost, dark circles under her eyes, her whole body aching, every breath an effort. Across the table, Balthazar stared at the floor, his rough hands clutching a crumpled handkerchief. No one said anything. The air tasted of iron and unshed tears. On the table lay an open blue notebook, Nayara's notebook. In the corner of the page, drawn in colored pencils, was a calm sea full of small waves, and underneath, in crooked handwriting, was the phrase, "One day I want to see the sea." Romina ran her fingertips over the drawing as if she could feel the salt of the water there. Tears came without warning, falling on the paper and running the ink. She pressed the notebook against her chest and cried softly, as if she didn't want to wake anyone. Balthazar got up slowly, walked over to her, stopped behind her, and put his hands on his wife's shoulders. "I don't know what to do," Romina said, her voice broken. "I don't know how to bury a daughter." She turned her face toward him, her eyes red, her nose wet. "I don't know either," he replied in a thin voice, "but I do know what she asked for." Balthazar blinked slowly, confused. "What do you mean?" Romina opened the notebook to the last page. There was a magazine clipping stuck there, a woman throwing a handful of ashes into the wind in front of the sea. Below it was written by the girl's hand, "If I go to heaven, I want the sea to know. Told me, Romina continued, swallowing her tears. That night she said that if she didn't wake up, we should scatter her ashes in the sea. Balthazar put his hands to his head. He shook his head vigorously. I don't want to think about that. I don't want her to turn to ashes. Romina stood up and held his face in her trembling hands. She loved him. Balthazar was her dream. He was all she talked about. The sea is the only thing she asked us for. He cried like a child. Thick tears fell to the floor. I promised her I would take her to see the sea alive, and now she choked. Now only what's left of her will see it. Romina hugged her husband tightly. The two of them stayed there, clinging to each other, leaning on what little was left. Their crying filled the whole house, a cry without consolation. When they managed to breathe again, she spoke without looking at him. I already talked to the funeral home. They're going to prepare everything. Balthazar lifted his face, his gaze lost. Cremator, Romina replied firmly, but with a broken voice. We're going to do what she wanted. He walked toward his daughter's room, each step like a knife piercing his chest. The room still smelled of soap and paper. The pillow was sunken, the blanket folded on the dresser, the little box of shells. He opened it carefully, listening to the sound inside as if searching for Nyara's voice. Listen, daughter, he murmured with a sad smile. I can hear you. I know you're here. Romina entered slowly and stood in the doorway, watching this big, strong man broken in front of a little box of shells. She said nothing, just approached and took a shell, squeezing it between her fingers. When we get to the sea, I'm going to leave one of these with you, she whispered, so he'll know who you were. Balthazar closed his eyes. The sea will take what's left of her, but I'll never be able to let her go. Romina cried again, and he hugged her. The two of them swayed slowly in a silence filled with pain. Later, sitting side by side on the bed, they looked at a small suitcase packed with a simple light blue dress, Nyara's favorite, and a paper flower she had made herself. Romina caressed the fabric as if it were skin. She'll look beautiful, she murmured, as if she were going to see the sea for real. Balthazar felt her gaze drifting away. Yes, she will. The distant sound of a breaking wave seemed to echo in their heads, even there, far from any beach. Romina closed her eyes and, for the first time since everything had happened, spoke in a firm, though trembling voice. We're going to fulfill her last wish, even if it hurts. Balthazar ran his hand over his face, wiped away his tears, and said hoarsely, May the sea be kind to her. And they stayed there, embracing, staring into space, trying to believe that fulfilling that request was somehow a way to continue loving, because sometimes love is that, letting go, even though your heart cries out never to let go again. The hearse slowed to a stop in front of the old building. The half-faded sign read, San Felipe Municipal Crematorium. The sky was cloudy, a heavy gray that seemed to match everything what was inside the vehicle. Nyara's body was covered with a simple white sheet, with her name written on a piece of paper attached to the corner. Outside, the wind blew against the windows, stirring up dust and dry leaves. The technician in charge, a man in his 50s with a tired face and a distant look in his eyes, opened the doors of the vehicle and pulled out the metal stretcher. He did this every day, many times, but that morning, for some reason, his hands trembled a little. It's just one more, Javier muttered to himself. Do what you have to do. He entered with the body, pushing the stretcher down the narrow hallway. The cold lights flickered, and the sound of the wheels on the floor broke the silence. At the end of the hallway, a large iron door awaited him. Behind it, the oven was already on and ready. The air inside was hot and heavy, smelling of smoke, metal, and alcohol. Javier placed the board with the papers on the table and began to separate the documents. The sheets were full of stamps, signatures, and schedules. He checked everything quickly without really reading it. He spoke softly, as if repeating a customary prayer. Name, Nayara Lopez, 13 years old. Natural causes, medical authorization. He paused and sighed. 13 years old, he repeated, shaking his head. What kind of world is this, my God? He carefully arranged the sheet in an almost automatic gesture. The body felt light, too light. Light. Nayara's eyes were closed, her face calm, almost serene, as if she were sleeping a very deep sleep. The technician took the board and turned to sign the last space on the form, but he twisted the paper. The pencil fell and slipped. "Damn," he muttered, bending down to pick it up. When he stood up, he heard firm footsteps approaching. "Javier, are you ready?" asked a deep voice. It was Dr. Mark, the medical examiner on duty, a man in his 40s with a calm but attentive gaze. He wore a clean gown, but his eyes showed the exhaustion of someone who has seen too much pain. "Almost, doctor," replied Javier, arranging the papers. "Just the last signature." Mark approached, took the clipboard from his hands, and looked at the documents. "It's the girl from Texas, right?" "Yes, sir. The hospital sent her early. The mother signed yesterday." "Good," murmured Mark emotionlessly as he read. But when he turned to check the body, something in him changed. The air seemed to stop. The sound of the oven became distant and muffled. He took another step closer, then another. The sheet covered the body up to the chest. The face was uncovered. The skin did not have that dull tone that time gives to the dead. There was something strange, a glow. Mark frowned and leaned over slowly. He put his hand on the sheet and pulled it down a little, letting the cold light of the room touch the girl's entire face. What he saw tightened his chest. It wasn't that common dry gray. It was something different. The skin had moisture, an almost living reflection. The lower lip wasn't dry. There was a little faint color, but it was there. Javier called out in a low voice, "How long ago did this body arrive?" "About 2 hours, doctor. The hospital confirmed the death last night." He paused when he noticed the doctor's tone. Why didn't Mark answer? He moved closer, observing the girl's neck. The hair stuck to her skin. There was a drop of water or sweat. He didn't know. "Doctor," the technician insisted. Something happened. Mark stood still, his gaze fixed. Every detail seemed wrong. The tone of the skin, the light, the texture. He knew well what a cold body looked like. He knew what death was, but this didn't seem like it. "The skin still shines," he whispered, almost without realizing he was speaking aloud. "What?" Javier frowned. Mark looked at him seriously. "I said her skin still has a shine to it." He touched the girl's arm with his fingertips. It didn't feel completely rigid. There was a slight flexibility, a minimal response. A chill ran through his body. "Doctor, the oven is hot. Can I finish the protocol?" asked the technician nervously. Mark raised his hand, asking for silence. He couldn't take his eyes off the girl. It was as if something deep inside him was telling him to stop. The light flickered once, the oven clicked, and the doctor, his heart pounding, took another step forward, unable to take his eyes off Nayara's face. That skin, too alive to be dead. That glow that shouldn't exist. The moment hung in the air, as if time had forgotten to move forward. Mark wasn't breathing. Javier waited. The whole room seemed to hold its breath, and in that second, the world fell silent. The air inside the room felt heavier. The sound of the oven, which had been constant before, now sounded like a distant, muffled roar. Dr. Mark was still standing in front of the girl, feeling his heart beat faster with a strange sensation rising through his body. That mixture of fear and intuition that only those who have seen death up close can understand. He leaned in a little closer. The cold lights reflected on Nayara's face, and for a moment he thought it was just the light, a trick of the eyes. But there was something there, something alive. Her skin seemed damp, and her temperature was perhaps higher than normal. Mark brought the back of his hand close to her face without touching her. He felt heat, a slight heat, but it was there. He swallowed. Javier murmured without looking away, "Bring me a flashlight." "What for, doctor?" asked the frightened technician. "Just do it quickly." Javier ran, tripping over his own feet, and returned in seconds with a small flashlight. Mark turned it on and pointed it directly at the girl's face. The beam of light passed through her eyelashes, revealing an unexpected glow. And then, before his eyes, slowly and almost invisibly, a small drop began to form in the corner of the girl's left eye. Mark blinked, unable to believe it. He thought it was an illusion, but the drop fell, leaving a silent trail on her cheek. A tear remained motionless. Time stood still. The sound of the oven disappeared. The air seemed trapped in their lungs. Javier said, almost without a voice, "Are you seeing this?" The pale technician took a step back. I saw it, doctor. I swear I saw it. It's a tear. It can't be, Mark murmured, bending down closer. This can't be. The tear continued calmly, stubbornly, until it fell onto the sheet, leaving a small, dark stain. Mark felt his whole body tremble. Reason screamed inside him. It's just condensation. It's the cold. It's coincidence. But his heart said otherwise. Something screamed inside. She's alive. He took her wrist with both hands, instinctively, desperately, closed his eyes, and concentrated for a second. 2, 3, nothing. But in the 4th second, a very slight touch, a heartbeat, barely visible, but there, a slow, insistent, timid rhythm, as if life were knocking on the door, asking to come back in. My God, whispered Mark, his eyes filled with tears. She's alive. Javier's eyes widened. What do you mean, alive? The hospital already declared her dead. Mark stood up suddenly, his voice firm and urgent. Stop it! Stop the oven right now, he shouted, turning to the technician. Quick, turn it off. The sound of keys falling, the metallic noise of the locks opening, the technician running back and forth. But, doctor, he stammered, trembling. What do we do now? Mark didn't answer. He grabbed the stethoscope hanging on the wall and placed it on the girl's chest. The sound was faint, but there was a slow heartbeat, like that of a tired little bird trying to move its wings after a storm. She has a pulse, he murmured. It's weak, but she has it, Javier. He put his hands to his head, not knowing what to do. This is a miracle, Mark interrupted firmly. This is life, and we're not going to let her go. He began to move instinctively, but his racing heart made everything seem blurry. He took an emergency oxygen mask, opened the airflow, adjusted the sheet to free the girl's chest, and touched her neck again, now more carefully. The pulse was a little clearer. Hang in there, girl, he whispered with teary eyes. Hang on a little longer. Javier was shaking, not knowing what to do with his hands. Doctor, who do I call? Call the ambulance now and tell them it's a code red. She's alive, do you understand? Alive. The technician ran to the landline phone on the wall and began dialing with a trembling voice while explaining what was happening. Meanwhile, Mark remained kneeling next to the stretcher, holding the girl's pulse with one hand and adjusting the oxygen tube with the other. Sweat ran down his forehead, mixed with the tension of the moment. The sound of the oven, which had been like a distant roar, was now just a muffled, forgotten noise. Come on, Nayara, he said softly, calling her by the name he had read in the file. Listen to me, girl. You've come too far to give up now. The air began to feel lighter. Mark looked at her face again. Her skin was still shiny, and in the corner of her mouth there was a slight movement, a faint breath, almost nothing. But he saw it, and with tears in his eyes he whispered, Breathe, little one, breathe. The distant sound of a siren began to be heard outside. Javier looked at him, the phone still in his hand. They're coming, doctor. They're on their way. Mark nodded, his eyes still fixed on her, and at that moment, without understanding what was happening, he felt the impossible in front of him. Life returning, demanding to be seen. The oven was still hot. The clock read 9:42, and a girl whom the world believed to be dead had just proven that her heart was still beating, slowly and weakly, but beating nonetheless. The emergency room was filled with sounds that seemed otherworldly. The irregular beeping of the monitor, the humming of the respirator, rapid footsteps, tense voices. Nayara's body, now connected to cables and tubes, seemed too small in that cold bed, surrounded by machines that never stopped flashing. The air smelled of alcohol and electricity. The clock on the wall read 10 o'clock a.m. on the 8th. Dr. Mark, still sweaty, and with his gown stained from running, kept his eyes on the monitor. A green line rose and fell irregularly, but it was there, alive, a weak but present heartbeat. He murmured, almost without believing it, She's reacting. A nurse ran in with a metal tray, the sound echoing through the room. Doctor, here are the adrenaline vials. Leave them for now. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Let's stabilize her first. She's coming back on her own. Technician Javier, still pale, watched everything from the wall with a lost look in his eyes. He seemed trapped in the image from minutes ago. The tear, the scream, the shock, the miracle. "Is this possible, doctor?" he asked, his voice trembling. She was cold, with no pulse. Mark didn't answer right away. He approached the girl, adjusted the wires on her chest, then placed his hand on the sheet, feeling the gentle movement as the machine pushed her chest up and down, slow and marked by the machine, but there was a slight tremor in her eyelids. "Possible or not," he replied softly. "It's happening." The nurse looked at the monitor and opened her eyes. "Doctor, the oxygen is responding. The saturation is rising." Mark turned quickly. The numbers on the screen flashed 72, 78, 82. It was still low, but it was rising. He felt a lump in his throat. "My God," he whispered, his hands on the edge of the stretcher. Javier took a step forward, unable to contain his emotion. "She's breathing, doctor. Look at her. She's breathing." The doctor took a deep breath, trying not to cry. The experienced professional tried to stay strong, but the man behind the gown was trembling. "Keep monitoring," he said in a broken voice. "Every second counts." The next few minutes passed slowly, like hours. The team came and went with silent, surprised looks, unable to believe it. An assistant who had just arrived whispered to another, "Is it true what they say, that she was in the oven?" The other just nodded without saying anything, his gaze fixed on the body of the girl who was now breathing. Mark adjusted the mask on her face, looking carefully at every detail. The skin that had been cold was now beginning to show a little pink color. He ran his hand over her forehead and felt warm. "She's warming up," he murmured, almost without a voice. The nurse smiled, unable to hide her excitement. "She's coming back, doctor. She's coming back." The doctor stepped back a little, took off his gloves, leaned against the wall, and closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, trying to understand what he was seeing, how a girl who had been given up for dead could now be breathing. The beep of the monitor remained irregular, but steady. Each heartbeat was like a touch of hope. Mark opened his eyes and looked at her. The girl seemed calm, her hair now a little messy, stuck to her temples. The air flowed in and out of the tube slowly with a soft sound, almost like a sigh. He leaned in again and whispered in her ear as if she could hear him, "You're strong. You know much more than everyone thinks." One of the nurses approached without taking his eyes off the monitor. "Doctor, her heart rate is stabilizing." Mark nodded slowly, his eyes filled with tears. "Keep watching, and don't turn anything off, not even for a second." Javier, the technician on the other side of the room, still couldn't say anything. He just stood still, as if afraid to break the moment, his hands clasped, his eyes filled with tears. "I saw her cry, doctor," he said softly. "I saw her. I thought I was crazy, but I saw her." Mark looked at him wearily but with a small smile. "And if it is crazy, how wonderful that it is this kind of crazy." The beep of the monitor continued steadily. Tum, 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 the most beautiful sound in the world. Outside, footsteps could be heard in the hallway. Doctors gathered, nurses murmuring. No one understood anything, but inside, no one wanted an explanation. They just wanted to see that green line continue moving on the screen. Mark sat in the chair next to the stretcher, his eyes fixed on her, the girl who had returned from silence, the one who had defied the end. The ventilator continued with its slow, steady sound. Each breath seemed to bring back not only air, but hope, and the exhausted doctor whispered, almost like a father, "Breathe, little one, breathe. The world still needs to see you open your eyes." The hospital hallway was silent, the kind of silence that comes after a scare when everyone is still breathing slowly, trying to understand what happened. Outside the emergency room, Dr. Mark sat with his coat over and red eyes. His whole body felt heavy, as if he had run miles without moving from the spot. Inside the room, the sound of the monitors remained the same. Beep, beep, beep. Nayara was stable, still unconscious, but alive, breathing. A door opened, and a man in a dark suit and glasses entered, holding a clipboard in his hands. It was the chief cardiologist, Dr. Figueroa, a calm-voiced, respected man with many years of experience. He walked slowly, as if each step weighed heavily. "So it's her," he said, looking through the glass window at the body of the girl who had returned. Mark stood up. "She's back, doctor. She's back after all." Figueroa turned to him with a serious but curious look. I want to see all the reports. Temperature, transfer time, death certificate, everything. I've already asked for them to be put together, Mark replied. But doctor, I checked her heart myself. It wasn't beating. No pulse. No reflexes. The cardiologist said slowly, thinking about each word. And yet, now it's beating. Mark took a deep breath, weak but beating. A heavy silence filled the air. Figueroa entered the room and approached the bed. He checked Nayara's pulse, then her neck. He looked at the monitor carefully, murmuring calculations and technical words to himself. Finally, he stepped back a little, crossing his arms. Doctor, Mark said in a low voice, this is not a mistake. Mark furrowed his brow. How is it not a mistake? I saw something similar once, many years ago, explained the cardiologist. The heart slows down so much that it seems to stop. Breathing becomes so weak that the body enters an almost frozen state. It's rare, almost impossible to notice. Mark opened his eyes in surprise. So she was never dead, completed the cardiologist. Her heart didn't stop completely. It just slowed down so much that it seemed like it did. The coroner said nothing. His hands began to tremble. He ran a hand through his hair trying to understand. But doctor, her body was cold as ice. Figueroa looked at him seriously. It's the body defending itself. When the metabolism slows down so much, the body goes into survival mode. It remains between life and death, and the temperature drops significantly. Mark sat back down, feeling weak. So she was alive all this time, replied the cardiologist firmly. Very weak, almost impossible to notice, but alive. The two remained silent, just listening to the sound of the monitor. Those weak but steady heartbeats now seemed to scream at Mark's chest. He lowered his head, feeling tears begin to well up in his eyes. My God, he whispered. If I hadn't checked again. Figueroa placed a firm hand on his shoulder. You checked her, and you saved her. That's what matters. Mark took a deep breath, trying not to cry. But how many times had this happened without anyone noticing? How many children? How many patients? The cardiologist closed his eyes sadly. More than we would like to imagine. The coroner got up, walked to the window of the room, and stared at Nayara. Her face was calm. The ventilator made her chest rise and fall slowly. He put a hand on the glass as if he wanted to touch her. It seems her heart decided to fight until the last second, he said in a trembling voice. Alone, without help. Figueroa looked at him silently. Sometimes, Dr. Mark, the human body is more stubborn than death itself. The coroner let out a slight, joyless laugh and ran his hands over his face. Stubborn, he repeated. Or maybe it's faith. The cardiologist adjusted his glasses and looked back at the monitor. Science can explain what happens. But why? Maybe only she knows. Mark remained silent, watching the green line rise and fall like small waves. Each of those heartbeats seemed to say the same thing. I'm still here. She spoke softly, almost like a sigh. She defeated death for minutes, maybe seconds, but she defeated it. The cardiologist approached and said in a voice that mixed respect and amazement, What you saw today, Mark, is not common. Her heart slowed down so much that it fooled the eyes, the machines, medicine. But even so, she never gave up. Mark nodded without taking his eyes off her. So what we saw was the impossible, saying, Wait for me a little longer. The monitor continued with its soft beeping sound, and there in that cold hospital, two doctors, one guided by science, the other by instinct, stood in silence in front of a girl who, between life and death, chose to keep breathing. Romina heard the words, and her world collapsed in a second. My God, we were going to burn her alive. The phrase came out like a cry stuck in her throat, and she couldn't contain herself. Her legs buckled suddenly and she fell to her knees in the hospital hallway, her hands sliding across the cold floor, her fingers searching for something to hold on to, and finding nothing. The crying came immediately, deep, the kind that breaks your chest. It wasn't just pain, it was guilt, fear, anger, all mixed together in a single knot that squeezed until it took her breath away. She banged her forehead against the floor on impulse, as if doing so could change something. Nothing changed. The only thing that changed was the sound. The crying became louder, new, different. the cry of a mother who feels her whole body falling apart. Balthazar stood a few steps back with his hands in his pockets, not knowing how to approach her. The strong man from the workshop had become a heap of fragility. His face was red, his eyes swollen, and he was breathing with difficulty. He tried to speak, opened his mouth, closed it. No voice came out. He walked towards her, stopped, looked at her body kneeling on the floor, and then, as if his instinct betrayed him, sat down next to her, without touching her. Romy murmured with a trembling voice, "My love." She did not respond immediately. Her gaze was fixed on the floor, lost in memories. The last hug, the last conversation, the whispered promise. Her hands clenched the air as if trying to grab something that was no longer there, as she pounded one fist against the palm of her other hand, as if trying to release the guilt that burned inside her. "I promised," she said in a broken voice. "I promised to take her to the sea. I promised to protect her, and I left her alone." The words came out jumbled, almost meaningless. How could I? How could I? Balthazar lowered his head and let the tears fall silently. He no longer had the strength to cry out. He thought about the hours spent beside the sheet, the little things he hadn't done. The guilt was a stone in his chest that prevented him from breathing properly. He felt shame more than anything else. Shame for having failed as a father. Shame for not having seen what he should have seen. A nurse approached slowly with open hands in a gesture of care. "Ma'am, please calm down. We're doing everything we can," she said in a soft voice. Romina looked up with anger and pain. "Yes, calm down," she repeated, not believing it. How could she be calm? They were going to cremate her. The crying returned, loud and wet, and she covered her face with her hands, rubbing as if she wanted to erase that image from her head. Balthazar tried to lift his wife, but his hands were shaking too much. He rested his forehead against hers, both of them moving between sobs, afraid to touch each other too much in case the other broke. Even so, they embraced, a hug full of guilt and forgiveness that was not spoken aloud. Forgive me, my girl," he murmured in a whisper that only Romina heard. "Forgive me, please," she replied with a sob. "I don't know how to forgive now," she said with a dry voice. "I don't know if I'm going to forgive myself." The hospital staff tried to help with water, a blanket, words of comfort, but nothing broke through that wall of pain that covered them. They didn't want to hear explanations. They didn't want anything that sounded like an excuse. This was bigger than protocols, than paperwork, than reasons. It was a mother facing what almost happened to her daughter. Minutes passed that felt like hours. Romina sometimes remained completely silent, sometimes shouted nonsense, words to the sky and the ground. Balthazar stared at the ceiling, still, with his fists clenched and trembling. Sometimes they looked at, and then looked away, as if they didn't want to see themselves in the mirror. They couldn't look each other in the eye, for fear of what they would find there, the reflection of their own guilt. To look would be to accept that they hadn't protected her. To look would be to ask themselves who had failed. It would be to look for someone to blame, and at that moment, the guilt was a thorn that neither of them could remove. Romina took her daughter's notebook, still stored in the bag, and opened it to the pages with drawings of the sea. Tears fell on the drawings, blurring the waves and fish. She touched each image as if she were touching the girl. "Forgive me, my love," she whispered so softly that almost no one heard her. Balthazar rested his forehead on hers, letting out a silent cry. "I should have seen it," Romy murmured. "I should have stayed. I should have insisted more," she replied without lifting her head. "I should have taken her to the doctor. That day, I should have." The words were lost in a sob. There was no answer that could heal. There was not enough comfort. All that remained was that cold floor, the white walls, and two broken parents trying to piece together what was left. Guilt united them and separated them at the same time. Sometimes someone reminded them to breathe, to sit down, to drink water. Small practical acts of care that seemed silly in the face of such pain. Even so, accepting a glass of water, washing their faces, was a minimal human act to stay alive. When they finally allowed themselves to sit still next to each other, they could no longer separate guilt from reason. The pain was shared by both, but each carried their own wound, and to look at the other was to see themselves reflected in that wound. And there they remained, Romina still on her knees, Balthazar sometimes sitting, both with swollen eyes, unable to look at each other for fear of breaking down completely. The crying didn't stop, it just changed form, sometimes a sigh, sometimes a whisper asking for something. All of this filled the hallway as if it were the only thing alive in that place. No words could explain what it feels like to almost lose a daughter in such a definitive way. No promise for the future erased what had happened. Only the present remained. Two devastated parents who had to find a little bit of themselves among the pieces in order to continue caring for the daughter who had almost been taken from them. The early morning in the hospital was silent. The white lights that never go out made everything look cold, almost lifeless. The hallway smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. Outside the intensive care unit, Romina and Balthazar sat holding hands. Unable to sleep or speak, Dr. Mark slowly left the room in his wrinkled gown, his eyes sunken and tired. He walked toward them with slow steps. He paused for a moment, as if gathering the courage to speak. Romina stood up immediately. "Doctor, is she okay?" she asked, her voice trembling with fear. Mark nodded with a small, tired smile. "She's reacting slowly, but her heart remained strong throughout the night." Balthazar took a deep breath, as if a weight had been lifted from his chest. "Thank God," he murmured, running his hand over his face. But Mark still looked uneasy. His gaze didn't linger on theirs for long. He walked over to the wall, leaned against it, and remained silent for a few seconds. The distant sound of the monitors in the intensive care unit filled the air, a reminder that life inside was still fighting. Romina noticed his different gaze. "Doctor, are you okay?" she asked affectionately, even though her eyes were swollen from crying so much. He smiled slightly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just a little affected by her," insisted Balthazar. Mark remained silent, then sighed deeply. "It's not just her." His voice came out low and heavy, full of memories that still hurt. The parents looked at each other without understanding. Mark ran his hand through his hair nervously and spoke, looking at the floor. "I've never told anyone at the hospital this, but I've seen this before." Romina took a step forward. "How so?" The doctor took a deep breath, as if searching for words. "I had a sister named Clara. She was 16. He paused. "One day she fainted at home. She couldn't breathe properly. Her body was cold. Her pulse was barely detectable. We took her to the emergency room and they said that she was already gone." Silence filled the hallway. Romina covered her mouth with her hand. Balthazar looked down. Mark continued, his voice breaking a little. "I was a medical student at the time, and I believed them. I believed what they said. I saw my mom fall to the floor crying, my dad screaming, and I didn't ask any questions." He looked at his hands as if he saw blood on them. "They took her away to perform an autopsy. I wasn't there. I couldn't." The air seemed to disappear for a moment. He took a deep breath and continued. "One of the technicians told me years later that when they went to prepare the body, they found her with a different expression. Her face had changed, but it was too late." Romina cried silently, her face filled with pain, imagining the suffering behind that memory. From that day on, Mark continued with a trembling voice. "I promised myself that I would never again let a body go without being sure. Really sure. Even if they said I was crazy. Even if it seemed useless." He moved away a little and walked to the window. The reflection of the city lights could be seen in the glass. "When I saw Nayara, I swear that for a moment I saw my sister's face. The same glow on her skin, the same strange coldness, the same silence. And I couldn't," his voice broke. "I couldn't let it happen again." Romina covered her face with her hands, crying loudly. Balthazar got up and went to the doctor. He placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Doctor, you didn't just save my daughter's life. You saved us too." Mark took a deep breath, his eyes filled with tears. "I wish it had been like that with Clara." He smiled sadly, looking at the floor. "But maybe today, she helped me save Nayara." Romina wiped her face, her voice trembling. "She surely helped." The doctor nodded, trying not to cry. "I felt something, you know, like an impulse, as if someone were pushing me to look again, as if telling me it's not time yet." Baltasar squeezed her shoulder, "Purse," without saying anything else. Mark took a deep breath and said almost in a whisper, "Sometimes medicine can't explain it. Sometimes it's just love that screams louder." The hallway fell silent again. Only the constant sound of the monitor from the intensive care unit could be heard, steady and constant. Romina looked at that closed door and said softly, "I'm glad you heard that scream, doctor." Mark looked away to hide his tears. "I heard it, ma'am, and this time I won't let it go." He remained there, leaning against the wall, exhausted, but with a lighter heart for the first time in many years, as if somehow life had also given him a second chance. The 6th day dawned with a different light, the kind of clarity that seems to come not from the sun, but from a deeper, quieter place. The intensive care unit was silent. The sound of the monitors sounded like a heart beating for everyone there. Dr. Mark arrived early, exhausted, with deep circles under his eyes, but still attentive to every detail. Romina was sitting in the chair next to her daughter's bed, her hands intertwined with hers, while Baltasar watched from the doorway, not daring to enter. Nayara's face had more color. Her previously pale lips now had a slight pink tone. The ventilator was still working for her, and the machines flashed with different rhythms, as if life were soft music playing again. Romina spoke softly the whole time. "Mommy is here, my love. We are with you," and stroked the girl's hair in a repetition that had already become a prayer. The doctor entered slowly, checked the monitor, then looked at her. "The signs are good," he said with a small smile. "Her body is reacting well and she will wake up," Romina asked with a trembling voice. Mark sighed. "It could happen at any moment, but when it does, stay calm. The body wakes up first, then the mind follows." Romina felt herself trying not to cry. She no longer knew if what she was feeling was fear or hope. The hours passed slowly. The sun changed position, shining through the window and illuminating the white sheet. Romina fell asleep with her head resting on the edge of the bed, holding her daughter's hand tightly. She was so tired that her eyes burned. It was then that she felt a slight movement, a tiny pressure on her fingers. She opened her eyes instantly and looked at her daughter's hand, and saw it. Yes, her fingers moved first. A small tremor, then a weak squeeze. But there it was. "Nayara," Romina whispered, unable to believe it. "Daughter, can you hear me?" The monitor kept its rhythm, a faster beep, a signal. Romina got up and brought her face close to the girl's. "My love, it's me. It's Mommy. Can you hear me?" The girl's eyelashes moved for a second or two, and then slowly her eyes began to open, slowly, fearfully, like someone returning from a deep sleep and trying to understand where she was. "Nayara," Romina cried, resting her forehead on hers. "Thank God." Baltasar, hearing the cry, rushed in. "What happened? What was it?" She opened her eyes. The mother could hardly speak, overcome with emotion. Dad approached slowly, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He looked at his daughter and felt his legs tremble. "My girl," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You're back, daughter." Nayara's eyes were open but filled with tears. They moved slowly, trying to recognize the faces. The light in the room seemed very bright. She blinked several times. Romina cried, holding her face in her hands. Calm down. Everything is fine now." But Nayara wasn't saying anything. Her mouth moved, but no words came out, only weak, trapped air. Her lips trembled, her eyes filled with tears, and then a silent tear slowly rolled down her cheek, just like the one from days ago. Romina felt her heart tighten. "You don't have to talk, my love. It's okay now." She kissed her daughter's forehead as her tears wet the pillow. "Cry, my love. Cry as much as you need to." Baltasar covered his mouth, trying not to cry. The man who had always been a rock was now a river. "I'm here, daughter. Daddy's here," he said, his voice breaking. Dr. Mark rushed in, alerted by the nurses. When he saw the scene, he stopped and stood for a moment, observing the mother, the father, the daughter, life returning before his eyes. He approached slowly and checked her heartbeat. "Everything is normal. She's awake now." Romina looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Don't worry, doctor. She doesn't speak." "It's normal," Mark replied calmly. Her body has been through a lot. Sometimes it takes time. The important thing is that she's here. Nyara slowly turned her face toward the sound of the doctor's voice. Her eyes met his, and in that gaze, Mark saw something that broke him inside. A silent, pure gratitude, full of life. She tried to smile, but it was only a half smile. The tears kept falling one after another, as if her body needed to release everything her soul had kept inside during those days. Romina ran her fingers through her daughter's tears. "You don't have to say anything, my love. I understand." Balthazar approached and kissed her forehead carefully, as if touching something sacred. "You're back with us, my girl. You're back." Time stood still at that moment. No one looked at the clock. No one thought about anything else but that miracle. There, the girl whom everyone thought was gone, was crying, crying alive, crying because she felt, and every tear that fell was as if her heart were saying what her voice could not yet say. "Here I am." The following days were a mixture of relief, surprise, and silence. The news of Nyara's recovery spread through the hospital corridors like a whisper of a miracle. Nurses, technicians, doctors. Everyone stopped in front of the ICU window just to see the small body that was still fighting to live. Romina did not move from her daughter's side. She slept sitting up with her head resting on the edge of the bed. Balthazar, in his workshop uniform still stained with grease, arrived every morning without saying much, just to see her breathe. Every breath was a victory, but now it was time to understand why. Dr. Mark, although relieved, could not rest. The case troubled him. He needed answers, not only for himself, but for the world. On the third day after Nyara woke up, an entire team entered the room, men and women in different gowns, colored badges, clipboards in their hands, specialists from many areas, cardiologists, neurologists, physiologists, experts in hypothermia. The whole hospital wanted to understand how a girl who was considered dead could come back to life. Mark introduced each one, explaining calmly, "Romina, Balthazar, these are the best we have. They are going to take care of her now." Romina raised her eyes tiredly, with mistrust. "Take care of her? How are we going to do complete studies, tests, MRIs? We need to understand what happened," replied the doctor kindly but firmly. Balthazar crossed his arms. "I just don't want them to make her suffer again." Mark put his hand on her shoulder. "No one will. Now it's different." The specialists surrounded the bed, checking every detail with an attention that bordered on respect. The sound of the machines mixed with the technical murmurs. But there, among the complicated terms, there was a thread of humanity. One of them, the oldest cardiologist, shook his head slowly and murmured, "This is a very rare phenomenon." Mark nodded. "Yes, it happens when the heart slows down so much that it enters an almost dead state. The body shuts down, but the brain continues to store a little bit of energy." Romina looked down and cried again, this time silently. Her face lit up with a mixture of fear and relief. The tests lasted for hours. Blood, temperature, heartbeat, reactions. Everything was carefully noted. At the end of the afternoon, the team gathered in the next room. Mark stood in the center with his arms crossed, listening to each idea. "It's not simply dehydration," said one of the doctors. "The signs of extreme hypothermia are clear, and her heart responds to stimuli much more slowly than normal," added another. "It's as if her body has learned to conserve energy in order to survive." Mark listened in silence. Only when everyone fell silent did he speak. "So we have a name for this," said the neurologist, glancing at the papers. "Catalepsy due to hypothermia is extremely rare, but it has been documented. The body temperature drops so low that vital signs almost disappear. Anyone could mistake it for death." Mark took a deep breath. "So that was one of the younger doctors," he commented thoughtfully. "His body literally cheated death." The phrase hung in the air. Romina and Balthazar entered at that moment, anxious for news. Romina held the rosary between her fingers. "Doctor, please tell me it's something good." Mark smiled wearily and affectionately. "It's good, yes. Now we know what it is, and we're going to treat it well." "And what is it called?" Balthazar asked, still confused. "Catalepsy due to hypothermia," Mark replied. "It's a rare condition that causes the body to shut down. making it appear dead, but it's not. And now that we know, we can create a protocol so that this is never confused with true death again. Balthazar looked at his wife without understanding much, but his gaze said it all. Hope. Romina brought her hands to her face, her body trembling. So she's going to be okay? Mark nodded. It will take time, but yes, now she will have the right treatment. For a moment, no one said anything. All that could be heard was the distant sound of the respirator and the soft rustling of the sheets as they passed through the racks. A nurse entered to adjust the IV. Mark approached the bed and looked at the girl. Nyara slept peacefully, her breathing soft. At the head of the bed was a drawing she had made before all this. The blue sea and a lonely little boat. He smiled a little. You brought back what medicine almost lost, he said, more to himself than to her. Romina heard and replied softly, excitedly, you brought her back. He shook his head with a discreet gesture. I just heard what your heart was trying to say. While the specialists discussed details and prepared new tests, Mark left the room, walked down the quiet hallway, leaned against the wall, and closed his eyes for the first time in years. He felt the old pain, the guilt he carried for his sister, begin to heal inside. Inside, the machines continued their song of life. The doctors wrote. The mother prayed. The father, not knowing how to express what he was feeling, he just watched. And so, on that afternoon, a new beginning was born, not only for Nyara, but for all who witnessed the impossible for the first time. Medicine gave a name to the miracle, and the miracle finally began to be treated with the respect it deserved. The room was dimly lit, only the lamp next to the bed breaking the darkness. The hospital air was cold, but within that space there was a warm silence filled with feelings that no words can describe. Nyara slept, her body still fragile, the cables on her arm, the sound of the monitor filling the room with that constant beep, beep, beep. Balthazar entered slowly, as if entering a sanctuary. He was wearing his grease-stained workshop uniform, his face tired, his gaze heavy. He closed the door carefully and stood there for a while, just looking at his daughter. She looked so small there, surrounded by machines, and at the same time, so strong. He pulled up a chair and sat down next to the bed. He slowly ran his hand over her forehead and felt the soft warmth of her skin, different from the coldness before. He took a deep breath, his eyes filled with tears. My girl, he began in a hoarse voice. You're here. You're alive. A small smile escaped him, but soon his face fell again. And I don't know what to say to you. He lowered his head, his hands closed guiltily. He stood there silently, breathing heavily, as if gathering strength to face his own heart. I failed you, daughter, he said softly. I thought you were weak. I saw you sick, and thought it was an exaggeration, that it was fear of living. His voice broke. He wiped his tears with his grease-stained arm. You were stronger than me. Nyara was asleep, or perhaps listening. A slight movement of his fingers seemed like a response. Balt, he smiled through his tears. I thought I was the man of the house, the protector, the one who knew everything, but it was you who faced death, my love. You were the brave one. His chest tightened, and tears came without warning, thick and desperate. He leaned over the sheet, gripping her hand tightly. Forgive me, please. The words came out broken, full of regret. Forgive me for not listening to you, for doubting, for thinking that your silence was weakness. His voice became a trembling whisper. I should have listened to you. I should have taken you to the sea sooner. I should have believed in everything you felt. He took a deep breath, sobbing. You were too strong for this foolish world, my girl. The sound of the monitor remained the same, steady, calm. Each beep seemed to respond. I hear you, Dad. Balthazar rested his forehead on his hand, crying silently. I love you, my girl. I love you more than anything. He stayed there for minutes, maybe hours, as if time had stopped. Romina appeared at the door and saw him. She stood still, watching her husband break down in front of their daughter. She said nothing, just approached slowly and put her hand on his shoulder. She feels it, Balthazar, she whispered. She knows. He lifted his face, his eyes red. I know she knows, but I needed to tell her. He smiled sadly, his voice trembling. I needed you to hear me from here. Romina leaned over the bed and kissed the girl's forehead. "She is our strength, Balthazar. She always has been." He felt her squeezing his daughter's hand once more. The two of them stayed there in silence, watching Nyara's chest rise and fall slowly. The sound of the monitor continued like soft music, reminding them that life went on. Balthazar ran his fingers through her hair and said, "I promise you, daughter, I will never call you weak again." The tears came again, but now they were different. Not from despair, but from a love that hurt and healed at the same time. He stayed there until they were both asleep. "I promise you, daughter, I will never call you weak again." The tears came again, but now they were different. Not from despair, but from a love that hurt and healed at the same time. He stayed there until his body grew tired, his head bowed, holding that little hand as if he were holding life itself. Outside, the whole hospital continued at its own pace, but in that room, time had stopped. It was just a father and his daughter, a heart asking for forgiveness, another silently forgiving. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky orange and pink. The road, still wet from the early morning, reflected the soft glow of dawn. The car was simple and old, with the constant noise of the engine and the smell of gasoline mixing with the wind inside. Nyara traveled in the back seat, wrapped in a blue blanket. The wheelchair was folded in the trunk. Romina sat next to her husband, with her hands in her lap, and a lost, anxious look on her face. From time to time, she turned around to look at her daughter. Nyara, now with a little color in her face, looked out the window, her hair sticking to her face. The glass was slightly fogged up, and she drew small waves with her finger, just as she used to do in her notebook when she was younger. Balthazar drove slowly, as if he were afraid that time was passing too quickly. The radio played an old song, one of those songs about love and coming home. He looked in the rearview mirror and saw his daughter's reflection, smiling a slight, almost shy smile, but one full of life. "Are you tired, sweetheart?" Romina asked, turning to her. Nyara shook her head without speaking, but her gaze said no. Romina smiled. "Then get your heart ready. We're almost there." Balthazar adjusted the rearview mirror. "Yes, we're almost there." Her voice came out low, with a weight that mixed fear and gratitude. The road began to change. The trees turned into fields, and the air became different, fresher, saltier. Nyara felt the wind coming in through the window and closed her eyes, breathing deeply. It was something new, but it felt familiar, as if she had dreamed of that smell her whole life. The car continued to the end of the road, to the point where the asphalt turned to sand. Balthazar turned off the engine and remained still for a moment, gazing at the horizon. The sound of the waves reached them softly from afar, like a call. Romina was the first to get out. The wind ruffled her hair and brought the sound of the sea closer. She ran to the back door and opened it slowly. "We're here, my love," she said with a trembling voice. "Look." Balthazar took the wheelchair out of the trunk, opened it carefully, and placed it next to the car. Then he bent down and gently lifted his daughter. Nyara looked at him with a mixture of fear and joy. He smiled. "Let's go see the sea, sweetheart." She nodded, and he lifted her into his arms. Her light body nestled against his chest, just like when she was little. Romina grabbed the blanket and smoothed her hair. The three of them began to walk toward the sound of the waves. The sand was soft, the wind was blowing strongly, and the smell of salt filled the air with every step. The sound of the sea grew louder. Balthazar stopped when the wind became humid and white foam could be seen from afar. He lowered the chair, carefully placed Nyara in it, and slowly pushed her very close to the water. The ground became firmer, and the sand colder. Romina knelt beside her daughter and pointed ahead. "Do you see it, my love? It's the sea you wanted so much." Nyara looked, and for a moment, everything stopped. The sea stretched as far as the eye could see. Gentle waves came and went, breaking with a sound that sounded like a sigh. The sun reflected off the water, forming dancing paths of light. The wind played with her hair, and a tear fell without warning. Balthazar took a deep breath, his eyes also filled with tears. "It was worth it, wasn't it?" he said, almost in a whisper. Romina took her daughter's hand, crying, but also smiling. You did it, my love. You did it. Nyara said nothing. She just breathed, closed her eyes, and felt the wind on her face, the smell of salt, the sound of the waves, the gentle cold of the sea breeze on her skin, and she cried again. But now it was different. It was not pain or fear. It was life. Romina rested her head on her daughter's shoulder. Can you feel it? She asked, moved. It's the sea embracing you. Nyara squeezed her mother's hand and let the tears fall. It was as if her heart was saying what her voice still couldn't. I lived to see this. Baltasar stood behind them, unable to speak. He ran his hands over his eyes and smiled, looking at the horizon. She won, Romina said, her voice trembling. She won. The sea was still there, infinite and calm, dancing in front of them. Nyara opened her eyes and stood there in silence, letting the wind carry away the rest of her fear. For a few seconds, the world seemed to stop. There was no hospital, no pain, no memory of suffering, just that moment. A girl in front of the sea, breathing, alive, complete. A tear fell, bright, calm, soft, but now it was a tear of life. The sea breeze blew strongly, bringing the smell of salt and new life. The waves came and went calmly, as if the ocean were breathing with them. Nyara was there between them, her small hands clutching theirs tightly. Romina on one side, Baltasar on the other, the three of them standing in front of infinity, as if time had also stopped to watch. Romina looked at her daughter, and then at her husband. Baltasar's face was marked not by pain, but by exhaustion mixed with relief. The tears on his face glistened slightly, reflecting the sun. He looked at the horizon with the eyes of someone who finally understood what it means to lose and win at the same time. Look at her, Baltasar, said Romina, her voice trembling. She's alive. He looked at Nyara, took a deep breath, and nodded. Yes, his voice broke. And I think we also came back to life with her. Romina smiled and cried at the same time. We were about to lose everything, and now it seems that the world looks more beautiful. Baltasar put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. She rested her head on his chest. The sound of the sea mingled with the breathing of the three of them. Nyara looked at them silently, her eyes shining. Romina wiped her daughter's face and whispered, You taught us to see life differently, my love. Baltasar took both their hands tightly. We spent so much time running fighting with the world, and in the end, it was just a matter of stopping and breathing together. He gave a small, sincere smile. I think now we've learned. The wind lifted Nyara's hair and moved her dress. She turned to look at her dad, and then at her mom. Her gaze said it all without saying a word. It was a thank you, an I'm here, and I love you. Romina kissed the girl's forehead. I promised you would see the sea, and here we are. The tears came again, but now they were soft. We did it, my love. Baltasar hugged them both tightly, without rushing. One of those hugs that ask for nothing in return, that just exist. I love you, Romy, he whispered close to her ear. And I love you, my girl. Romina closed her eyes with her face on his shoulder. I love you too, more than I can say. The three of them stayed like that for a while, feeling the wind, the warmth of the sun, the cold sand under their feet. A hug that seemed to glue all the broken pieces back together. The pain that had once been so heavy was now mixed with gratitude. It was as if everything they had been through served to remind them that love was still what kept the world going. Baltasar looked up at the sky with eyes full of tears. God was good to us, he said, his voice hoarse and sincere. Very good. Romina nodded without letting go of his hand. Yes, and we will never forget it. Forget. The waves broke closer, wetting Nyara's feet. She laughed softly, a gentle sound, almost shy but full of life, and it was the first time in a long time that her laughter had been heard between them. Romina and Baltasar also laughed, embracing each other without saying anything, there in front of the sea. There was no longer any fear or past, only that moment. The family united, more human, more alive, more complete. And as the sun slowly set on the horizon, they remained there, embracing each other, letting the sound of the sea carry away the rest of the pain, leaving only what was love. That story, which began in a silent crematorium, spread like wildfire, but this time It was a fire of hope. At first, it was just a rumor among nurses, the girl who cried before being cremated. Then it became local news, and suddenly it was in all the newspapers, on the radio, on the screens, in conversations. Reporters went to the hospital with microphones in hand, trying to understand the impossible, how someone could be declared dead and come back to life minutes before being cremated. They asked, and no one knew how to respond. They only knew that it had happened, that it was real. Romina and Balthazar, still frightened by so much attention, tried to protect their daughter from the commotion. Nayara, stronger now, stayed in her room reading, drawing, and sometimes smiling shyly when she saw her own photo in the news. She didn't quite understand what the world saw in her. Outside, a crowd of ordinary people left flowers at the hospital door. Moms, dads, grandparents, children. Some brought handwritten letters saying, "Thank you, Nayara, for reminding us that life is sacred." Others left toys, paper hearts, and lit candles. Dr. Mark, who had never been a fan of cameras, ended up being pushed into the center of it all. A reporter approached him in the hallway, his microphone trembling with emotion. "Doctor, do you realize what you did? You saved a girl that the world had already given up on seeing alive." Mark took a deep breath, adjusted his gown, and replied simply, "I just listened to what her heart was saying, and her heart was still speaking." That phrase became a headline. "I listened to her heart," read the front page of a national newspaper. It was enough to touch the hearts of the entire country. A few days later, the Ministry of Health announced an emergency meeting. Medical examiners, ministers, and specialists gathered to discuss the case. The newspapers broadcast live. Mark was invited. He didn't want to go, but he went. He sat at the table in front of politicians in suits and told everything without fear. "Yes, she was cold," he said in a firm voice, without prepared speeches. "But she wasn't dead. The human body can be deceiving sometimes. The heart just needs more time." A silence filled the room. One of the ministers asked, "And what do you suggest, Dr. Mark?" He took a deep breath. "Let's never rush to give up on someone again," he said. He looked at everyone. No body should be released without checking the signs carefully, calmly, respectfully, humanely. Everyone nodded. A technician wrote everything down. Days later, it would become an official document, the new protocol, Nayara's Law, as people now called it throughout the country. Cases of death from hypothermia or suspicious causes would have to undergo extended observation before confirming death. It was the first national protocol based on a miracle. The news spread around the world. Doctors from other countries called, wanting to understand what had happened. Nayara's case became an example in universities. Medical students heard her name in classes, and many said, moved, that if it weren't for her, we might never have thought twice. Meanwhile, the hospital was changing. Today, GIS began donating new equipment, respirators, and modern devices to detect vital signs. Business people, artists, and ordinary people joined together to help. A wealthy man in an expensive suit with teary eyes arrived at the reception one day and said to the director, "I have a daughter who left years ago. If this hospital had taken the same care, maybe she would be here." He left a huge donation in Nayara's name. Romina cried when she heard the news. Balthazar remained silent, hat in hand, not knowing what to say. The hospital now had a new floor dedicated to rare emergencies, and there on the main wall, a golden plaque read, "Life speaks in silence. We must listen. Nayara Lopez, 2025. The whole country learned something from that girl who almost left before her time. She not only saved her own life, she saved others she would never know, people who, perhaps one day because of her, would have time to breathe again. Nayara didn't understand the magnitude of it all, but sometimes in her hospital room, she would look at the flowers in the window and said softly, her gaze lost on the horizon, "Mom, the sea is big, isn't it?" Romina smiled, stroking her hair. "Yes, daughter, and now there's a little piece of you in there, and a little piece of the sea here inside you. We're still going to see of the sea thousands of times." And at that moment, Romina understood. Her daughter had changed the country, but more than that, she had taught everyone what it means to listen with your ears, with your heart, and with your soul. A girl, a cry, a tear, and the whole world began to see life differently. The room was now simple, filled with sunlight. The flowers in the window were beginning to wilt, but Romina took care of changing them every week. The sea was no longer in front of them, but its memory lived on in everything, in the sound of the wind, in the smell of the shells on the shelf, and in the framed photo that was right next to the bed. It was a photo of Nyara in front of the ocean, her hair loose, her gaze lost in the waves, a slight, calm smile. She still didn't talk much. Words came slowly, 1 or 2 a day, and sometimes she said everything with just a look, but she lived truly. She lived. The days were slow, simple, and full of life. Every morning before the sun came up, Nyara would wake up, settle into her chair, and stay there quietly, looking at the photo. She would touch the glass with her fingers and let her gaze get lost in the blue. It was as if she were talking to the sea in her own way, without sound, only with her heart. Romina always watched her from afar, in silence. One day she asked her softly, "Are you thinking about the sea, my dear? We're planning to go back there again." Nyara slowly turned her face and smiled. She didn't answer. She just pointed to the photo and made a small gesture with her hand on her chest as if to say, "Here inside." Romina understood. Balthazar entered the room, ready to leave, but stopped when he saw the scene. He stood quietly leaning against the door and said excitedly, "I think the sea lives in her now." Romina smiled with tears in her eyes and said, "She will live there, forever." Silence filled the room for a few seconds, broken only by the sound of the wind coming in through the window, moving the curtains and gently touching the mark in the photo. Nyara looked up, staring at the image. A tear fell slowly, quietly, just like that first one. But now it was different. It was a tear of life. And there, in that simple moment, was the miracle, the love, the rebirth. She survived and, in some way, taught the world to breathe again. If this story touched your heart, write C in the comments and subscribe for similar stories. Let's catch the next miracle together. Before you leave, don't forget to check out the videos on the screen. They're just right for you.